And talking about joy, it's my joy to be invited here to begin for us this new season. It's the Christmas season. It has been said that Christmas is the most hopeful season of the year. I don't know whether you agree. For most people, it is a joyful anticipation of the coming celebration of a Messiah. So to them, it portends spiritual renewal. For others, it is the anticipation of God's intervention in their difficult human condition and circumstances. And they are praying that someone would break through some of these difficult circumstances and sort out their messy family situation. Sometimes it's a relationship gone bad or bad to us. Others, it's a financial crisis. Maybe it's a failing business or a career that has refused to pick up. And you want somebody to come and change your current circumstances for the better. Still, for others, it's an opportunity to look back at how far we have come despite numerous challenges in order to arrive to where we are. And I know for some of you, just being here is a win. There's a passage in the Bible that's saying that after you fought those battles, having done all to stand, just the fact that you're standing is a testimony of God's goodness and his power to fight on your behalf. Because the foes that you faced were formidable, but here you are. So just being here is your Ebenezer moment. You can look back and say, thus far, the Lord has brought us. And that is a good reason to celebrate the season of Christmas. Whatever your perspective might be, Christmas is a time of good cheer, it's a time of anticipation, it's a time of joy, it's a time of hope, and I think it's a time of renewal as well. But I want to pose the question and ask, has it always been so? And in order for us to appreciate more fully the meaning of Christmas, it's important that we take a few steps back and recall what Christmas must have been like for the majority of the first century Jews living in Palestine at the time of the birth of the Messiah. And there's a way that we romanticize Christmas. Sometimes it's in the things that we do. Sometimes it's in the culture that we find ourselves in. If you're looking at the pictures of Christmas, you know, the baby Jesus, you know, is looking up and is bubbly and is smiling. I don't think he's supposed to cry, right? He's a baby, but I don't think he's supposed to cry. And Mother Mary, you know, doesn't look like a woman who has been in the travail of labor. She looks beautiful and calm and, you know, with a nice pose. And maybe you can even see her heart is glad. Joseph is watching by in awe. The goats and the donkeys are quite well behaved around Jesus, you know. Hakuna ku bray and you know, issuing statements of your. Everything looks too calm, too clinical, too sanitized. But is that really what Christmas is or was? How was the picture? And allow me to take you down that road. A little bit of a history lesson. So hang in there a bit. It's not your typical sermon, but I want us to appreciate the historical facts around the issue of Israel at the time of the birth of the Messiah. I want to consider this introduction because it's an introduction I'm doing to the Christmas series under the title, Hosanna, a Hope Deferred. Hosanna, a Hope Deferred. And at this time, because it's Christmas and I'm feeling generous, I'd like to ask somebody to tell me, and not a pastor, and not anybody in seminary, what does Hosanna mean? What's the meaning of Hosanna? We sing it all the time, you know? Hosanna in the highest. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. Okay, and I want to look at the middle grounds there. I see some hands right there. Okay, let me be generous. I'm going to give you 1,000 bob if you can tell me what 1,000, like catch money. Catch money. Hey. I think there are a few Kikuyus here. There's somebody whose hand shot up at the mention of 1,000, not at the mention of Hosanna. Okay. Jasmine, utafanya counseling hapo kidogo. There's been no leakage. Okay?
No, but
No Google.
I want to try. Yeah.
All right, go ahead and try.
So I think it means highest praise.
Highest praise. Okay, that's the contextualized meaning of it, but that's not the actual Hebrew meaning of Hosanna. But good try. Let's give her a hand. I still have my 1,000. Okay, a young lady there. Hosanna.
Save us now.
Makofi kwake. You're not the same one who answered last in the first service. Okay. Cash money hapa, 1,000. Chukua hapa. Although I should have written a check. Because the topic today is hope deferred. Anyway, sawa. Well done. Save us now. I bet we didn't know that. Hosanna, save us now. And consider this. On the first Palm Sunday, Jesus is grown now. This is the triumphal entry. He's entering into Jerusalem, and in a week's time, he will be dead. But as he enters Jerusalem, the crowds are lining with palm fronds, and some have put their coats down for even the donkey to step on, and everybody is shouting, Hosanna to the Son of David, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna in the highest. What are they telling him? Is it a statement of praise, or is it a political slogan? Save us now. Save us now. Save us now. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Why? Because he's coming to reinstall the Davidic kingship. For the first time, we will witness the appointed Messiah of God coming from the lineage of the great King David, who is supposed to overthrow the Roman, the tyrannical Roman government and install again the kingdom of Israel afresh. Remember what the disciples were asking Jesus? Will you at this time restore the kingdom of Israel? It was a political question. It was the most important and pressing issue for the Israelites at that time. They had lived under oppression. They were longing for freedom. And now, here comes the king. Little wonder that they would shout, Hosanna in the highest. And 1 week later, they would shout what? Crucify him. Why? He has let us down. We had hoped that this is a time of God's redemption, that the Davidic kingdom would be reinstalled once again, and he would sweep away Rome and all oppressive pagan rulers, and the righteous reign of God would begin. Hosanna to the Son of David. They were a disappointed lot, and they were shocked that this man who had claimed to be a son of David would come and would not even raise a finger against Rome, would not issue a bad comment against Caesar. When asked to pay taxes, he paid taxes. And when they came upon him, he didn't fight back. He even ordered his disciples, I have other armies not of this world. I can defend myself. But this is your time when darkness rules. And they see him raised on a cross, crucified, helpless, hopeless, and powerless. They couldn't stand that. So crucify him. Away with him. He's a pretender to the throne. The situation in first century Palestine at the time of the birth of the Messiah was not looking up. And historically, a series of events dating back nearly 800 years had conspired to ensure that the people of God were an oppressed, powerless, and anxious nation, existing at the whim of powerful pagan kings. These are God's people. Let me give you a bit of historical background. After the fall of the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel or Samaria, 722 BC, under the power of the Assyrians, the Israelites were scattered all over that world. And so they lost their direction, they lost their culture, they lost their traditions, and they were assimilated into various places. Shortly afterwards, there was the fall of the southern Judean kingdom by the Babylonians. Nebuchadnezzar came and laid siege in Jerusalem. And in 597, between 597 and 582 BC, Israel, again, the southern kingdom, fell. Together with the destruction of Jerusalem itself, the destruction of the temple, and the loss of the Ark of the Covenant. It was a disaster of such monumental proportions, it could only be equaled with the Egyptian captivity under slavery for a thousand years earlier. That's how disastrous this was when the people of God went into exile. And of course, we know that's when people like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and others from the nobility were deported and went to serve Nebuchadnezzar in his court in Babylon. And they lived out their life in exile because 70 years had been decreed for the exile of the people of God. In fact, after this, Israel would exist for hundreds of years under the rule and the control of these kingdoms, under the mercy of foreign kingdoms, until and including the time of Jesus' birth. Independence for them would remain a national ideal, a patriotic aspiration that was always out of reach, a hope deferred. One kingdom would fall, but another would rise. But Israel would still remain a colonial outpost, a nation to be ruled. But just like the Babylonians had defeated the Assyrians, the Babylonians themselves, that empire gave way to the Persians. The Persians took over under Cyrus, under Darius, and the others, the Medo-Persia kingdom. But Israel was still under their rule. The Persians later would be conquered by the great military campaigns of Alexander the Great, who would come and establish the Greek Empire, 333 BC. But guess where Israel was? Still under the rule of the Greeks. But they knew that one day, a ruler would arise, the promised Messiah, who would overthrow these pagan rulers and institute the righteous rule over the people of God. But it was a long time in coming, and their hope had to be deferred. Closer to the time of Jesus, by the beginning of the 2nd century BC, control over Israel would change hands between two rival factions of the Greek Empire. Now, Alexander was a great guy, and under his rule, it seems like the Jews did very well. There was freedom of worship, there was good religious tolerance, there was prosperity, there was a lot of exchange because the Greeks themselves had a lot of good advantages. They brought with them medicine, good architecture, they brought sports, they're the ones who instituted the Olympic Games, and many traditions that have continued even up to this date. But after the fall of Alexander, when Alexander died, he did not leave a successor. When the generals asked him, "Who have you left your kingdom to?" he said, "I have left it to the strong." And so a power struggle ensued after 323 BC when he died. And for about 7 years, there was just infighting. Eventually, there would be two factions that would rule the great kingdom. One of them would be known as the Ptolemaic dynasty under General Ptolemy, who was a cousin of Alexander and who took the Eastern Kingdom, ruling from Alexandria. The other one was General Seleucus, who instituted the Seleucid Empire. He would rule somewhere from the west on the Syrian side. Now, these two guys were competing for control of Palestine. And when you read history, it's very interesting. For some reason, every dynasty that came, every power that came, they did not completely consider themselves powerful until they had subdued Palestine, Israel, and particularly Jerusalem, for some reason. So Israel was being jostled between these two, the Ptolemies on one side and the Seleucids on the other. It was so bad that in 25 years, Israel changed hands 7 times. You can imagine you are under this ruler and in 25 years. So it was chaotic. And it was a very painful time for the people of Israel to be so unstable and to be so unsure about their future. Now, coming closer again to the time of Jesus Christ. one of these guys who finally won the control of Israel, the Seleucids from Syria, what they did, because they were pagan kings, one of them, a general by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes, ordered that the statue of the god Zeus, who the Romans called Jupiter, be erected in the temple of God. And now, for the Israelites, now this you have pushed it too far. There was such a violent revolt, and it was led by priests called the Hasmonean priests, or some of you know them as the Maccabees. It's known as the revolt of the Maccabees. And so these priests led a very violent revolt. They pushed out the Greeks. So for some 100 and something years, there was some freedom where now the priests would rule both as priests and as kings at the same time. Unfortunately, it was not a very stable rule also, because there was a lot of infighting between them. In fact, the way this dynasty came to an end, the Hasmonean dynasty, is because two brothers, Hasmonean brothers, who are priests, claimed the crown of kingship over Israel at the same time. There was such a violent quarrel that the two now new powers, Greece now has diminished in terms of its power. There are two kingdoms rising, the Parthians, who are ruling from Syria, and the Romans from the west. So these were to be the two new powers. They came to resolve this crisis in Israel. Who is to be king between the two Hasmonean brothers? The Romans prevailed, and they subdued the Parthians. They chased away the Parthians, and then they took one of the brothers, the Hasmonean brothers, and installed him as their puppet king. And that's how Rome began to rule Israel. So the control of Israel passed from the Hasmoneans now to the Romans, 63 BC. Because Israelites were very volatile, they decided to impose a direct rule. And so what they did is to appoint a military governor to rule over Israel and watch over this king. And the general was called Antipater, but it didn't last very long. I think he was assassinated by the Parthians, but his son now took over. And when his son took over around 60 or so BC, his name was Herod. And Herod is the Herod that we know as King Herod the Great. He ruled between 37 BC and around 4 BC, okay? As you know, Jesus was born during the rule of who? King Herod. And Herod himself died in 4 BC. So there's a miscalculation about the time of the birth of Jesus, all right? Because technically Jesus could not have been born in 4 BC before himself, you get, all right? But anyway, Herod died in 4 BC, and so if we make the corrective adjustment, at one time, Herod, who was a very paranoid king, had decided to kill all the children that were 2 years and below, because he had been told by the wise men that, where is the one who has been born king of the Jews? At the mention of king of the Jews, he knew he was the king of the Jews. How can there be another king? So according to his calculations of when the star appeared, he reckoned this child should be around 2 years old. So technically, Jesus then must have been born around 6 BC, all right? So that by the time Herod is dying in 4 BC, then he's about 2 years old. That's just a corrective in terms of history. Herod was a cruel king. He was very brutal. He was very paranoid. He was so fearful that he killed most of his male heirs within his family so that they could not take over from him, including his 2 sons from his favorite wife, so that when they grow up, they don't get this idea that we are going to be king. That's the kind of person that he was, all right? And he was cruel to the extreme. And I was considering this because when the Bible begins from the book of Luke, it says, in the days of King Herod the Great, that's when actually Jesus is going to be born. And one of the things that puzzles you about God is that if you were to choose a time when your only son, whom you love, were to be born, and you had the freedom of choice of place, circumstances, or even who is ruling, would you choose a time like that? Would you choose a king like this? That Jesus will actually be born under the rule of this cruel, really crazy king. And quite a number of times, God will have to intervene to do maneuvers in order to save the life of Jesus, because this guy is really after him. We don't always understand what God is doing. But the truth about it is that when Christ was born, the announcement was that for to us, a child is born. He was born to us. Or a Savior has been born to us in the city of David. God was not going to sanitize the circumstances of Jesus' birth. And if he was to be a true Savior, he was to come to a people who need saving. Those people are sinful. Those people are murderers, some of them. So those people are brutal. Many of them are cruel. Half the time they are fighting, they are quarreling, they cannot agree. The first Christmas was a messy situation. It was not clinical. It was not beautiful. It was politically tumultuous. King Herod had been brought up with Caesar Augustus back in Rome. And so he had been favored. And he was determined to serve Rome. So he wanted to turn Israel into a Greco-Roman state. He saw Jerusalem as the Athens of the East. So everything about it was going to be something that would reflect Rome and please Caesar. That way he could continue his reign. Rome was committed to two things, and if you read history, many of us know about something we call the Pax Romana. The Pax Romana is the Roman peace. And normally in history, when we're quoting the Pax Romana, we say the Pax Romana was one of the reasons that the gospel spread very rapidly, because it was a huge empire and there was peace. Now, peace from their point of view is that you had to quash any rebellion or any dissent of any kind. Okay? So there was no toleration of the expression of religion, expression of freedom of speech, and so on. There's nothing like that. It's just like if there's an uprising within your state, you do whatever it takes to repress it and make sure that hakuna noise. If people need to die, let them die. But let there be no noise. So that was the Pax Romana. The second thing that they believed in was in the Tax Romana. I believe you are familiar with that part of the Tax Romana. The Tax Romana is what financed the empire. And it was a huge empire. So how do you take care of the armies? Some outposts were literally more than 1,000 miles away, but they were maintaining control over there. You know about the Roman roads and how well networked Rome was. To date, those roads still exist. Grand building projects that existed, the theaters, the gladiator games, lots of entertainment and so on. So because Herod was that kind of a king, he embarked in very huge building projects. In fact, part of where he gets the word the Great is the monumental nature of his building projects. One of the places that he reclaimed was a seaport known as Caesarea Maritima. And Caesarea obviously is named after Caesar because he had to show his loyalty. If you go to that place, which is a ruin, of course, now in Caesarea, you actually are able to witness a reclaimed seaport. He would reclaim the sea. At its height, it could dock up to 300 ships. In fact, when that was heard, a lot of historians disputed and said nobody in the ancient world, there's no port that could dock 300 ships. Now they are doing the archaeological excavations, and they are seeing how far he had reclaimed the sea, because some of those pillars and structures are now underwater. But they could see the extent to which he had reclaimed. It is true it could dock up to 300 ships. He had other monuments that he would create. His own mausoleum was called the Herodium. It's magnificent. Again, you can still see the marble and very expensive stones that were used there. So in order to finance these projects, he needed to conscript slave labor, a lot of slave labor, and a lot of people died in his projects. The other thing that he needed is huge financial resources through punitive tax systems that he had instituted to ensure that the money kept flowing in for these grand building projects. So that was Herod. And at the time that Jesus is born, this is the prevailing political, cultural, and economic circumstances. People are very poor because they are being overtaxed. Thank you. I see those hands. And they're very repressed. He was a very unpopular leader. They hated him. But there's nothing they could do about it because he was also very, very heavy-handed. Any opposition would be met with instant, maybe persecution, thrown into jail, or even killed. I think I'm describing this so that we don't idealize what Christmas was like for first century Jewish believers. Or that we are not, on the other hand, tempted to think that God doesn't understand the circumstances that we are in. Whether at a national level, in terms of, just the growing discontent of the circumstances that we see around us, some of the, wastage in public resources, and the fact that we ourselves have less and less and less. When you're talking about a hope deferred, I think even here, we have had to defer many things. I'm sure you received some invitations from the leadership, especially for our volunteers. We normally hold our volunteers' dinner every year without fail. But this year, we invited you and then we canceled it. And I think Reverend Maura must have written to you and said, due to financial constraints, I don't know whether he said it's financial constraints. He might have put it better than me. So sorry, I'm not doing good PR here. Due to circumstances beyond our control, we are postponing the dinner or the luncheon to 25th. It's a hope deferred because things are difficult on the ground. I was saying it's probably the first time in 18 years when we might have to send our staff home without a Christmas bonus. It's never happened before. Lakini, when we look at situation kwa ground, it's going to be a hope deferred, not a hope denied. But unless the Lord does a miracle or something shifts and changes, it's most likely we cannot afford to give a Christmas bonus for our people. Because as it is, we are struggling just to do our basic minimum payments, because that's how things are. So everybody is feeling it, and it's a difficult season and situation. Well, I want you to know that this is not outside of God's purview. It doesn't mean that God has left us, or he doesn't care about his people, or he doesn't care about the families that are struggling financially, and now we know that there are many. But this was the situation of his people in first century Palestine at the time of the birth of the Messiah. This is what they were facing. It would be very easy to be discouraged if you look purely on the circumstances that you and I are facing today. It would be easy to think, is God even here? Does he care that we are struggling? Does he care that we don't have enough for our families? Now you can understand in context why the cry of Hosanna was a real cry. It was a cry for help. Save us now. Nikubaya, save us now. And they wanted relief from the political oppression. They wanted relief from the dire economic circumstances. They wanted relief from social injustice. The fact that you could not express yourself fully, that the mighty hand of Rome ruled supreme, whether you liked it or not. Hosanna means save us now. It's a desperate cry for help. It was saying our hope has been deferred for way too long. We can't hold on much longer. And the Israelites at the time were tired. They were tired of waiting. They were tired of praying. They were tired of hoping. And they were just exhausted. And I was wondering, maybe it describes you today. Are you tired? Tired of waiting? When you hear that this regime is only halfway through, guy, we have another how many years to go before the elections? Are you tired? Maybe some of us have been waiting on God to hold a child. Maybe you've been waiting on God to hold a job, for the business to pick up, for that reconciliation with your estranged spouse to happen. And it's easy to give up and wonder, God, are you even here? And it's a good time for us to cry, Hosanna, save us now. We need you. We need you. So that was the circumstance in first century Israel. But I want to say this, that even when God doesn't seem to move, there are still good things that happened. We have talked about the successive conquest of Israel by different domineering foreign powers, most of them, in fact, all of them pagan. And yet, we know that under these particular regimes, God did some good things. General Ptolemy of the Greek Empire, for example, ordered the translation of the Hebrew scriptures, the Torah, because they had one of the biggest libraries. In fact, it's thought to be the biggest libraries in antiquity, based in Alexandria. And he was told there was one book that was missing. The Hebrew scriptures are not there. And he commissioned 70 scholars who, it said, were translating the Holy Scriptures, which is the Masoretic text, which comes from the Hebrew. They were translating it into Greek. Why? Because since this dispersion, the fall of the two kingdoms, the majority Israelites no longer lived in Palestine. They were in the dispersion. They were the Jews of the diaspora. And what happened over time? Obviously, they no longer spoke Hebrew. And so in the lands that they were mostly, after the Greeks conquered, the lingua franca at that time was Greek. Because Greek was to the ancient world what English is to the modern world today. And so he ordered that the Hebrew text be translated into Greek. And it was called the Septuagint, or the Septuaginta, which, because it was translated by the 70, Septua is 70, by the 70 elders. And so, for the first time, Greeks living in the diaspora, Jews living in the diaspora, had the word of God in a language that they could understand. And this, because their exile would last hundreds of years, it helped them to maintain their holy traditions, to worship their God, and to gather together for this purpose in a foreign land. This would have been lost if it hadn't happened. So good things still happen. Never mind that he's a pagan king, but he did this for them. When you hear of the Septuagint, it was so accurately translated that every time you read the New Testament and Jesus is quoting, because now he was in a Greek context, and Jesus is quoting, and the apostles are quoting the Old Testament, they are actually quoting from the Septuagint. By the time of Jesus, again, of course, Greek is the lingua franca. Most of the New Testament is written in Greek, and so the quotations also come from the Septuagint. So something good happened even in those days. It's very easy to think that because we are living in an oppressive regime, that God is far from us, nothing good can happen. But that is not true. God never forgets his people. He never leaves his people, even in the times that it looks hopeless and it looks like he's not here with us. The Greeks then, having brought a common language and a common culture, unified, in a sense, that ancient world. And it would be very easy for people now to transmit the gospel, to do evangelism, to do teachings, even across different cultures. It is because of the Greek language that the gospel could cross cultural boundaries, religious boundaries, geographical boundaries, and national boundaries. Because under Alexander, the Greeks had unified the ancient world. The roads were equally good, which was carried on by the Romans, and it was easy to transmit this from place to place. This is where we find ourselves in the beginning of the book of Luke, where he says, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who, from the first, were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. Therefore, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, it seems good also to me to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. Again, Now, Luke, writing as a medical doctor, is very detailed in the things that he's going to say, most likely having learned his medicine because of the culture that was transmitted by the Greeks, and now able to diagnose the happenings through investigative scientific method. In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah. So this is the Herod that we're reading about. In the time of Herod, king of Judea, Jesus is just getting up ready to be birthed, and now we are introduced to King Herod. Now we know who he was and where he came from. The son of Antipater, a brutal, ruthless king that would reign supreme in Israel, because God purposed that his son would be born during the reign of an oppressive king, when the economy was not doing very well, when his own son could not even secure an inn and would have to be born in a manger, and in most likely a very poor family. But God had come for us, and he was born into our condition, not avoiding it, not sanitizing it, but saying, yes, this is the mess that I have come to clean. There are many who are brokenhearted. There are many who are disillusioned. There are many who are powerless. There are many who are hopeless. And Christ was born without power and without authority. And he subjected himself to human authority with all its cruelty, with all its unfairness, and with all its injustice, so that he could redeem your situation and my situation and translate it into something of beauty. Listen, as we close, because I was doing an introduction. The assessment of the situation of first century Palestine when Jesus was getting ready to be born sounds something like this. And I want to read for us from the book of Isaiah. It's a messianic text in chapter 9. It says this in chapter 9. Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress. So the normal mood for first century Palestine was gloom. So God identifies with us. Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will honor Galilee of the Gentiles by the way of the sea, along the Jordan. Listen to the description of the people. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. So it was the most accurate way to describe the people of Israel. They were walking in darkness. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as a people rejoice at the harvest, as men rejoice when dividing the plunder. For, as in the days of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of the oppressor. That was normative. A people oppressed. And God had come to shatter that. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. Why? For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. So there is a time when the government will not be on, I'm told nowadays you don't, you just says ... Yeah? There's a time that the government will not be on cruel human shoulders. Kings who don't care for their people, rulers who oppress them ruthlessly. The government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor. Do you know who needs a counselor? Who needs a counselor? People who are traumatized. Most Kenyans do. You don't want to say it's you. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end. So there's a time the reality will change. He will reign over David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness. The two things that we cry for, justice and righteousness. From that time on and forever, the zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. It's nice to know that it's not maandamano that will accomplish this, isn't it? Because sometimes we undermine and then nothing changes, and then you get even more disillusioned. So many people, even in the times of Jesus, there was a party called the Zionist Party, and they kept rising and revolting against the Romans. But they would be suppressed, they would be killed, they would be scattered, and Romans' rule would continue. You can get disillusioned. So it's good to go to the Lord and tell them, Lord, we are happy to wait for your time. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. So as we introduce this Christmas series, the Lord is with you. And in Christmas, God comes and he brings hope. And he can hear your Hosanna cries. Yes, there are Hosanna cries of praise, but there are also Hosanna cries of hope. A cry for salvation. Save us now. Only he can save us. Let's look up to him as we embrace the Christmas season, not hopelessly, but with hope. Our hope might be deferred, but it has not been denied. Amen? The Lord bless you.